Whenever a new franchise is founded in any sport, in any league, it's a prime opportunity for some weird trivia. Chief among which, the firsts. First goal, first penalty, first points, first touchdown, first win, and first home run. Originally, this video was going to be a collection of shorts going over who hit the first home run in the history of every NPB club. A little tide-over project while I worked on a big project for the offseason. Then the men who hit them ended up having such interesting stories that I couldn't keep them under a minute. From randos to Hall of Famers, Triple Crown winners to guys who were barely hanging on, this is the story of every first home run in the history of every NPB club. The first home run in Chunichi Dragons history was hit by Kiyoshi Maeda on May 17, 1936 against Tokyo Senators pitcher Shigezo Ishihara at Narumi Stadium in Nagoya. It was the 7th game in the club's history. The then Nagoya Baseball Club would fall in that game 5-2. Maeda's story is a short and sad one. Hailing from Fukui, he had initially been good enough to catch the attention of Keio University, but dropped out due to illness. He went to work in the textile industry and joined the Nagoya Baseball Club in 1936. He was drafted into the army in the fall of 1937 and was killed in action in January of 1938 in China. He was 25. Other than that, we don't know much about him. We don't even have a confirmed picture of him. That home run was one of only 3 he hit in his short career. But the stadium where he hit it is still kind of visible today, as it is now home to a driving school, with some of the old grandstands being used as administrative buildings for said school. One of my big future plans is to visit old stadiums like that and tell their stories. I'd originally planned to do so with Tokyo Stadium, but I couldn't get out to Arakawa before I left Tokyo. The first home run in the history of the Chiba Lotte Marines was hit by Katsuki Takura in the first inning of the club's first ever game on March 11, 1950, against Isamu Kinoshita of the Nishitetsu Clippers at Hankyu Stadium. The then Mainichi Orions would win handily that day, with a final score of 9-1. Later that year, in a game on July 5th against the Daiei Stars, Takura would also hit the first home run in a night game in NPB history. The 35-year-old Takura had been an amateur baseball star throughout the 1930s and 40s, mainly for Toyo Fisheries in his hometown of Shimonoseki. The Orions would sign him as they geared up to join NPB in 1950, intent on creating a super team to establish dominance over the old JPBL squads, which had constantly barred Mainichi from joining the league. His signing is actually one of the reasons the Yokohama BayStars exist today, as the president of Toyo Fisheries was furious about losing one of his best players to the pro ranks, so he started a pro team of his own. Despite winning the first ever Japan series with the club, Takura would leave the Orions after that initial season and signed with the Hankyu Braves for 1951. He would play for the Braves for the remainder of his career, making the PL All-Star team 5 times and being named to the Best 9 twice. He would manage the Braves for 4 seasons, but only got the club to 500 once in that span. He would briefly return to the Orions in 1967 as a manager, but his style was so unorthodox that he was fired halfway through the season, because that unorthodox style was not successful at all. Takura would only hit 75 home runs in his career, with the most in a single season being 21 in 1950. He would pass away in 1997 at the age of 82. The first home run in Hanshin Tigers history was hit by Isamu Fuji on May 4, 1936, against Tokyo Senators pitcher Akira Noguchi at Koshan Stadium. It was the 5th game in the club's history. Not only was it the first home run in Japanese pro baseball history, but it was also an inside-the-park homer. The Tigers would lose that game 5-3. Fuji was just 20 years old at the time, and went on to have a long and successful career. Although because of the Second World War, he only played for the Tigers for 4 years. When he returned to pro baseball in 1946, he instead joined the Pacific Baseball Club, who he stayed with for the remainder of his career. Fuji's career was defined by massive swings in his production. In 1948, he had one of the least valuable seasons on record, putting up negative 3.2 WAR. But just 2 years later, he was a 5 WAR player, because baseball. He would hit 146 home runs in his career, with the highest total being 34 in 1950. Fuji would retire in 1958 and move behind the bench until 1973. He passed away in 1983 at the age of 69. The first home run in the history of the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks was hit by Yoshitaro Suzuki on October 8, 1938 against Miyoshi Nakagawa of the Korakuen Eagles at Korakuen Stadium. It was the 20th game in club history. Suzuki had started the game at third base, but stepped in as a relief pitcher in the 4th and pitched 4 shutout innings to end the game. However, the then Nankai Baseball Club would lose that game 4-2. Suzuki had been a high school star in Shizuoka, mainly as a pitcher, and his main claim to fame was that he was the pitcher for Shizuoka High when they faced off against Shizuoka Commercial High School, with Emperor Hirohito in attendance in 1930. Like others before him, the Second World War had massively derailed Suzuki's career, as he was drafted in 1939. He returned briefly to the Nankai Baseball Club in 1943, hitting 1 more home run, but he got sent back again. When the war ended, Suzuki instead joined the Industrial League powerhouse Daishowa Paper, and played for them for the rest of his career. As a result, he only hit 2 home runs in his professional career. He would pass away in 1978 at the age of 64. The first home run in the history of the Hiroshima Toyo Carp was hit by Hall of Famer and hometown hero Katsumi Shiraishi on March 16, 1950, against Chunichi Dragons ace and fellow Hall of Famer Shigeru Sugishita at Fukuyama Mitsubishi Stadium in Fukuyama, Hiroshima. It was the 5th game in club history. The Carp would fall to the Dragons 5-2. Shiraishi is one of the greatest players to suit up for the pre-war Giants, nicknamed Cagney thanks to his resemblance to American movie star James Cagney. Despite his intimidating appearance, Shiraishi was reportedly one of the nicest guys in baseball. He was also absurdly lucky. Shiraishi dropped out of high school to join the Giants in 1936 at the age of 18, and this had opened him up to being drafted. However, he had avoided this by working in a munitions factory on his off days. However, when the JPBL was temporarily shut down in 1944, Shiraishi would be called up to fight, and he got sent to Hangzhou, China. However, since his commander had been a massive fan of the Giants, he protected Shiraishi, keeping him in the back lines as a cook rather than sending him off to fight. This same commander had not afforded the same protections to Osaka Tigers star Fumio Fujimura, leading to Fujimura nearly getting killed not once, but twice. When he returned to Hiroshima in 1946, Shiraishi was shocked by the devastation that was laid out before him, but he was able to find his family's old house and reunite with his mother. The shockwave from the bomb had blown off the 2nd floor of the building, but the main structure was still intact. Later, he was visited by Fumio's brother Takeo Fujimura, who he had also served with in China. Fujimura convinced him to join the Pacific Baseball Club, and he in turn helped lure Victor Starf into that club. But after that, he quit baseball for a year due to financial issues. He instead went to Beppu and worked for a construction company while also being player-manager of their Industrial League team. He would, however, return to the Giants in 1949. But when he heard that his hometown was getting a team, he immediately jumped ship again and signed with the Carp. He would stay with the club until 1965, first as a player, then as a player-manager, then as just a manager. Shiraishi remains a legendary figure in Hiroshima and was inducted into the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame in 1985. His first home run in a Carp uniform was the 26th of the 84 he would hit in his career, with the highest single-season total being 20 in that 1950 season. Shiraishi would pass away in 2000 at the age of 82. The first home run in the history of the Hokkaido Nippon-Ham Fighters was hit by Hall of Famer Hiroshi Oshita on June 2, 1946 against the Chiba Nippon Baseball Club's Naoki Hayashi at Hankyu Stadium. It was the 20th game in club history. The then Tokyo Senators, no relation to the previously mentioned Tokyo Senators, would fall 15-14 in 11 innings. Oshita was one of the original great power hitters in Japanese pro baseball. Although he was born in Kobe, he would move to Kaohsiung, Taiwan as a teenager, where he would attend high school and picked up playing baseball. In his 3rd year of high school, he would be forced to live in the dorm full-time because the students from a nearby girls' school and local sex workers wouldn't leave him alone. And it made sense. Oshita spoke both fluent Japanese and Mandarin, got top marks in nearly all his classes, and was the star of the baseball team. It was clear he was going places. Then World War II happened. Oshita had enrolled at Meiji University to avoid the draft, but when it seemed like university students might get drafted anyway, he jumped the gun and joined the Air Force, where he was nearly bullied into a kamikaze unit, but managed to avoid it by being selected for officer training, which he still hadn't finished when the war ended. Oshita would return to Meiji University for 1946, but something else happened that year. His mother came back from Taiwan, and she was now addicted to meth. He needed the money to support both of them, and he needed it now, and that's when the Tokyo Senators came calling. Oshita dropped out of university to play pro ball. He was immediately a star. His power-hitting ability, his dashing good looks, and his trademark blue bat made him one of the few reasons why anyone came out to watch the Senators in 1946. and were a big reason why Tokyo bought the struggling team in 1947 and renamed it the Flyers. As well as hitting the first home run in franchise history, he also graced the cover of the first issue of Baseball magazine in 1946. Oshita would stay with the Flyers until 1951, when his mother's health took a massive turn for the worse. Her addiction had gotten to the point where she began suffering from debilitating muscle pain that rendered her unable to walk. Oshita got her a private hospital room to keep the media off his back, and only reported the illness as gallbladder stones when asked about it. But this created an issue with the team. Oshita's freewheeling lifestyle had already been heavily criticized by the press, and when Oshita asked the team to comp the medical expenses for his mother's procedure, they refused, thinking that the 200,000 yen he was asking for wasn't for the medical expenses, but to pay off debts. This is despite Oshita being the best player on the team by a country mile, and being one of the few reasons people came out to watch them. Oshita was forced to sell all his trophies, which only furthered the team's narrative. This only served to further piss off Oshita, and when it was leaked that the Flyers were planning on cutting ace Giichiro Shiraki, he demanded a trade. When that was refused, he told the media he would never play a game for the Flyers again. The Flyers continued to try and jerk Oshita around, so he hired an attorney to do the negotiating for him. This forced the Flyers' hand, and he was traded to the Nishi-Tetsu Lions later that year. Oshita quickly became a fan favorite in Fukuoka, winning PL MVP in 1954, and with Yasumitsu Toyota, Futoshi Nakanishi, and Kazuhisa Inao by his side, he helped the Lions win 3 straight Japan Series championships in 1956, 57, and 58. He'd retire at the end of the 1959 season as a 6-time All-Star, an MVP, and an 8-time Best 9 winner. He would hit a grand total of 201 home runs in his career, with the highest total being 38 in 1949. After coaching on and off for the next 15 years, Oshita developed cerebral thrombosis, and it would eventually kill him in 1979 at the age of just 56. He would be posthumously inducted into the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame the next year. The first home run in the history of the Tokyo Yakult Swallows was hit by Goro Tsuchiya on March 24, 1950, against Yomiuri Giants starter Fukuzo Tada at Rakuten Stadium. It was the 12th game in franchise history. The game would end in a 5-5 tie. Goro Tsuchiya, like many others in this video, had his early career clouded by war. The ace pitcher for Hiroshima Commercial, where he participated in 1942's Phantom Koshin, Tsuchiya was able to enter Hosei University and avoid the draft, but he wouldn't be able to play baseball for the school until 1946, as the 1944 and 1945 Tokyo Big Six seasons were cancelled. Tsuchiya was unable to court any interest from JPBL clubs, and instead played Industrial League ball for Nippon Columbia in 1948 and 1949. But with the expansion of the JPBL into NPB for 1950, the Kokutetsu Swallows came calling and signed him on. Tsuchiya was not a power hitter. He was, however, an absolute weapon on the base path. In 1951, he won the Central League Stolen Base Crown with 51 steals, which remains the Swallows' club record. What makes this more impressive is he did it without being a qualified hitter, a feat only matched by the speed lord himself, Ukyo Shuto, in 2020. That Stolen Base Crown was the first offensive title in Swallows history. Tsuchiya would stay with the Swallows until 1955, when he signed with his hometown Hiroshima Carp, but his abilities were mostly gone by that point, and he'd retire in 1957, having not made a single appearance on the Major League squad that year. Tsuchiya would only hit 7 home runs in his 7-year professional career, and after his playing days were over, he became a regular columnist for Nikkan Sports, and was one of the few to correctly predict that the Toyo Whales would win the 1960 Japan Series. He would pass away in 2023 at the age of 98. The first home run in Orix Buffaloes history was hit by Minoru Yamashita on May 22, 1936, off of Dai Tokyo Baseball Club pitcher Shichinosuke Sakurai at Takarazuka Stadium. It was the 9th game in club history. The then Hankyu Baseball Club would beat Dai Tokyo 6-5. It was the first home run in Japanese professional baseball history that actually went over the fence. Hitting home runs was a familiar thing to Minoru Yamashita. Nicknamed Babe Yamashita in his high school days in the early 1920s, he helped Kobe Shinko High School to multiple Koshin appearances during his tenure. He kept it up at Keio University in the late 1920s, demolishing the competition in the early days of the Tokyo Big Six League. This made him slightly overconfident, and he'd often skip practice to visit his girlfriend or go out drinking. This caused him to be benched for the Soke Sen one year, but after Keio's offense couldn't get going, their manager reluctantly called on Yamashita to pinch hit. Yamashita supposedly took the first pitch he saw deep, in a very "I told you so" moment. After graduating, Yamashita went to Manchuria to work for Mantatsu Railways, playing baseball for the company team. and he kept up his high profile, being selected for what was essentially the Japanese national team in 1931 and 1934, that latter team being what we now know as the Yomiuri Giants. However, he returned to Manchuria rather than rejoining the team before their American tour. His skill naturally made him a target when the JPBL was founded in 1936, and he joined the Hankyu Baseball Club that year. He would stay with the club until 1940, when he was briefly drafted into the Army. He returned to play pro baseball in 1942 with the Nagoya Baseball Club before being called back into service. By the time the war was over, Yamashita was 38, and even with how desperate teams were after the war, nobody signed him, so Yamashita became an umpire instead. Yamashita would be inducted into the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame in 1987 and would pass away in 1995 at the age of 88. Despite only hitting 19 home runs in his career, the ball was so dead in the 1930s and 40s that was worth a whopping 425 home run plus, meaning he hit 325% more home runs than your average JPBL hitter at the time. Yamashita's career WRC plus was also a very healthy 148. Babe Yamashita indeed. The first home run in the history of the Yokohama DeNA BayStars was hit by Aikichi Nagamochi at Kitakyushu Municipal Stadium on March 14, 1950, off of Shochiku Robins ace Juzo Sanada. It was the fourth game in club history. The then Toyo Whales would fall to the Robins 5-4. Nagamochi himself had a very interesting life. Hailing from Shimada in Shizuoka, it looked like Aikichi would just be another normal guy. While he had started for his local high school along with his best friend Hitokoto Taju, the two had never courted any interest from the new professional baseball clubs. So Nagamochi went to work for Tokai Paper, and Taju went to Senshu University. In 1939, Nagamochi got drafted into the Navy, and would serve on the aircraft carrier Shokaku as an anti-aircraft gunner. This technically means that he was involved in the attack on Pearl Harbor, even if he just so happened to be on a ship that launched some of the planes. Nagamochi would serve on Shokaku until she was sunk in the Battle of the Marianas in 1944, and while he would survive the sinking, his face was badly burned. He would be picked up after 2 hours in the water and was sent to recover in the Hiroshima suburb of Kure. Whether or not he was still in Kure during the atomic bombing of Hiroshima is unknown, but in 1946, his old friend Hitokoto Taju had found him again and brought him to try out for the Tokyo Senators. Despite not really having played organized baseball for the better part of the last 6 years, Nagamochi would eventually become a decent role player, and was kept on when Tokyo bought the club for 1947. He would be traded to the newly formed Toyo Whales before the inaugural NPB season, and as mentioned earlier, he would hit the first home run in club history. However, he wasn't re-signed at the end of the season. Hearing about the turmoil the Hiroshima Carp were in, Nagamochi would sign for the club in 1951. He described this as an act of love, wanting to give back to the people of the prefecture that had helped him recover from his burns. He would play for the Carp until 1957, when he would retire. After retiring, he moved to Tochigi and managed Omiya Tech's baseball team to the 1968 Spring Koshien Championship, and he would later manage Sakai and Arawa High School in Saitama, helping both schools make Koshien. He passed away in 2000 at the age of 82. Eikichi Nagamochi only hit 43 home runs in his 11-year career, with the most in a single season being 9 in 1950 and 1953. The first home run in the history of the Saitama Seibu Lions was hit by Zenzo Hasegawa on March 16, 1950 at Osu Stadium in Nagoya, off of Tokyo Flyers reliever Yasuo Yonekawa. It was the third game in club history. The then Nishi-Tetsu Clippers would go on to hit 4 more homers, 3 of which were also off Yonekawa, and would win the game 21-14. That game still stands as the highest scoring game in NPB history. Zenzo Hasegawa came from humble beginnings in Tottori, Japan's least populous prefecture. However, he and star catcher Takeshi Dogaki took their high school to Summer Koshien in 1939, and this caught the attention of the Nankai Baseball Club, who signed him for 1941. Hasegawa was a defensive wizard for Nankai in his 3 years with the club, but seeing the way the wind was turning during the Second World War, Hasegawa elected to enlist rather than get drafted. We have no idea what he did during the war, only that he survived. Since he had enlisted, his contract was not kept on the back burner by Nankai, so he was a free agent in 1946, and he would join Dogaki on the Osaka Tigers that year. Here he picked up the name The Swallow for his speed and ability to come absolutely out of nowhere to make a great defensive play. After the 1949 season, the Tigers were absolutely gutted by several clubs poaching their best players. Hasegawa was no different, signing with the Nishi-Tetsu Clippers. Aside from hitting the first home run in club history, his 2 years in Fukuoka were largely underwhelming, although he was kept on when the Clippers absorbed the Nishi-Nippon Pirates and became the Lions. He would return to Dogaki's side as he signed with the Mainichi Orions as a free agent in 1952, but he was on the open market again for 1954, where he signed with the expansion Takahashi Unions. After 2 games, he quit and retired from baseball. He would briefly coach in the Lions system in the late 60s and would scout for the Lotte Orions in the 70s and 80s. He passed away in 1998 at the age of 75. Hasegawa would only hit 12 home runs in his career, with the highest total being 3 in 1949 and 1950. The first home run in the history of the Yomiuri Giants was hit by Hall of Famer Hiroyasu Nakajima on July 15, 1936 at Yamamoto Stadium in Nagoya, off of Osaka Tigers ace Tadashi Henry Wakabayashi. It was the 5th game in club history, and the first between these two bitter rivals. The Tigers would take the game 8-7. Hiroyasu Nakajima is one of the most important players you've never heard of. Hailing from Matsumoto, Nagano, he dragged his school to summer Koshin in 1928, even though he was technically an overager, as he was a month past his 19th birthday. Regardless, he enrolled at Waseda University, where he wasn't particularly good, not hitting a single home run. In fairness, playing the field every day was new to him, as he'd mainly been a pitcher in high school. After graduating with a degree in commerce, he was among the Waseda grads to suggest that Yomiuri chairman Matsutaro Shoriki should start a pro team so that Japanese baseball could flourish as a whole. His reasoning was that the promise of high pay would encourage young people to get as good at baseball as they possibly could in order to secure lucrative contracts, and that's why the Americans, who'd taken the game pro 60 years prior, were so good. Nakajima would be a founding member of the Giants in 1934, although he would not go over on the North American tour that gave them that name in 1935. Returning to the club for 1936, he became the first true face of the offense, and fostered much of the Giants' young talent, Tatsuharu Kawakami, Shigeru Chiba, and the man who appeared earlier on this list, Katsumi Shiraishi. Nakajima would go on to win the first Triple Crown in Japanese pro baseball history. Technically, as he only did it over half a season in the fall of 1938. If we were to look at the stats for all of 1938, he wouldn't have won that Triple Crown. Nakajima would continue to play for the Giants and became manager in 1943, before being drafted in 1944. We know nothing of his activities in 1944 or 45, but he returned to the Giants as a player-manager in 1946. But in 1948, he was demoted back to just a player in favor of Osamu Mihara. Nakajima would leave to become a player-manager for the Toyo Whales in 1950, even though he was 40. Despite hitting over 300 and putting up an OPS over 950 in both seasons, he barely put himself on the field, and would retire after 1951. From there, Nakajima became Yomiuri's chief man covering the Tokyo Big Six, which also allowed him to scout for the club. He'd be inducted into the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame in 1963. In the early 80s, there was a fracture within the Giants' OB, or alumni club, between those who favored Tatsuharu Kawakami and those who favored Shigeo Nagashima. Nakajima, who'd been the one to help Kawakami develop, and also been the one to scout Nagashima, was brought on to bring the factions back together. He would step down as OB chairman in 1984, and would pass away in 1987 at the age of 77. Nakajima would hit a grand total of 57 home runs in his career, with the most being 11 in 1938. The first home run in the history of the Tohoku Rakuten Golden Eagles was hit by Koichi Isobe on April 1, 2005 at Miyagi Stadium off of Seibu Lions pitcher Atsushi Okamoto. It was the 6th game in club history. The Eagles would defeat the defending Japan Series champions 16-5 in their home opener. We actually have footage of this one, so I'm just going to let it roll. Well, that was a time jump and a half. The Tohoku Rakuten Golden Eagles were founded in 2005 when Orix, Kintetsu, and NPB went behind the back of players and fans alike to cut a deal to merge the Kintetsu Buffaloes and the Orix Blue Wave. To say people didn't take this well was, an understatement. The resulting player strike would lead to the founding of the Golden Eagles, Sendai's first pro team since the Lotte Orions had left nearly 30 years prior. Rakuten had actually been rumored to be interested in buying the Buffaloes off of Kintetsu, which further reinforced the uselessness of the resulting mess. One of the consequences of that mess was that the stars of the Kintetsu Buffaloes were none too pleased about having to play for Orix. Norihiro Nakamura jumped over to play for the Dodgers out of spite, and Buffaloes ace Susashi Iwakuma and star Koichi Isobe demanded to be traded to the Eagles. If you know anything about how Isobe's career started, this is pretty ironic. After getting taken by the Buffaloes in the 1996 draft, Isobe initially expressed disappointment. He had wanted to go to the defending Japan Series champion Orix Blue Wave and play alongside Ichiro, rather than joining the lowly Buffaloes. But Buffaloes legend Kyosuke Sasaki had convinced him to sign for the club, and he would quickly become a fan favorite, forming close friendships with the Buffaloes' established stars Norihiro Nakamura and Tuffy Rhodes. In 2003, he was appointed as the last athlete president in Buffaloes history. When the merger was announced, Isobe made it clear that he would not play for any team that resulted from said merger. The Buffaloes were a brotherhood forged by suffering, with the occasional spark of greatness. They were less of a team and more of a family. Isobe had wanted to be a Buffaloes lifer, and the merger broke his heart. Regardless, Orix protected both Isobe and Iwakuma from the expansion draft. But when they held firm, they were both traded to the Eagles for cash. I guess it's fitting then that Isobe hit the first home run in club history, while Iwakuma picked up the first 2 winning decisions in club history. But Isobe's play slowly declined, and after the 2009 season, he was released by the Eagles despite only being 35. Isobe would step behind the bench and coach in the Eagles system until 2017. Since then, he's been a commentator on various channels, including Tohoku Broadcasting and J Sports. While Isobe won't be a Hall of Famer, he should still be very proud of his career, during which he hit 97 home runs, including 26 in the Buffaloes' final season in 2004. Just for fun, let's take a look at some of the first home runs hit by the 5 clubs that played in NPB but eventually went defunct. We'll go in order of their founding. The Shochiku Robins were an extremely complicated and tumultuous team that lasted from 1936 until 1952, when they would be contracted out of NPB and merged into the Toyo Whales, who we now know as the Yokohama DeNA BayStars. The first home run in the history of the Shochiku Robins was hit by Michinori Tsubochi on March 29, 1937 at Kamigusa Stadium in Tokyo, off of Michio Shigematsu of the Hankyu Baseball Club. It was the 44th game in club history, and either the 2nd or 3rd season of their existence, depending on how you count split seasons. Despite scoring 8 runs early on, the then Dai Tokyo Baseball Club would choke away that game and lose 17-12. Hailing from Ehime on the island of Shikoku, Tsubochi had initially been scouted by Rikyo University, but dropped out right before he was set to graduate in order to join the Dai Tokyo Baseball Club. He would stay with the club until the JPBL was forced to shut down by the government in 1944, by which time the team had changed their name twice, first to the Lion Baseball Club, named after the soap brand that was sponsoring the team, and when that got outlawed by the Tojo government because it was English, the team changed their name again to the Asahi Baseball Club. He would avoid the draft twice, first by breaking his collarbone a month before he was supposed to report to the draft office, then by becoming an ordained Buddhist priest and serving as a chaplain in 1945. When he returned to baseball after the war, he helped found the expansion Gold Star Baseball Club in 1946 and stayed with them until 1948. In 1948, Tsubochi became the first Japanese player to record 1,000 hits, but unlike today, he wasn't given any kind of award for the achievement. Instead, the game's official scorer pulled him aside afterwards and told him he'd done it. News of this reached the JPBL's commissioner, and from then on, awards recognizing these milestones would be given out. Tsubochi was also instrumental in forming the Professional Baseball Players Association in 1946, which would eventually evolve into the Modern Players Union by 1980. Tsubochi had spent the final 3 years of his career with the Chunichi Dragons, retiring in 1951, before embarking on a long coaching career that would see him coach until the mid-1980s. He was elected into the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame in 1992, and passed away in 1997 at the age of 83. His 1,472 career hits were complemented by only 34 home runs, but Michinori Tsubochi's impact on the Japanese game was immeasurable. Founded as an expansion team in 1946 by the aforementioned Michinori Tsubochi, the team that eventually became the Daiei Stars scratched and clawed for a decade to try and get a foothold in the Tokyo baseball market. Although they never succeeded, their eventual owner Masaichi Nagata was a very important figure in the 1960s baseball scene, with his own crazy passion project that was Tokyo Stadium. But that wasn't until after the Daiei Unions had merged into the Mainichi Orions in 1958. The first home run in the history of the Daiei Stars was hit by Yoshio Kikuya on June 8, 1946 at Hankyu Stadium off of Tokyo Senators ace Giichiro Shiraki. It was the 24th game in club history. The then Gold Star Baseball Club would beat the Senators 7-4. Gold Star was the final stop on Kikuya's 10-year baseball career. The two-way player was originally a member of the Osaka Tigers, whom he joined after dropping out of Kansai University, but Kikuya would bail on the Tigers after the 1937 spring season, missing their first 2 championships. He instead had been lured over by Dai Tokyo Baseball Club, where he met and became friends with Michinori Tsubochi. He spent 3 years in the army from 1941 to 1943 before returning to the club, now called the Asahi Baseball Club, for the 1944 season. After the war, Tsubochi would invite him to join Gold Star Baseball Club, and he would play for them for 1 year, before retiring to coach high school baseball, something he would continue to do until 1972, when he finally retired. He would pass away in 1990 at the age of 75. Kikuya only hit 7 home runs in his career, with the most being 3 in 1946. Probably the most famous defunct team, the Kintetsu Buffaloes had a history that could best be described as 55 years of pain. I already did a video on them, so that'll be linked on the top right. The first home run in Kintetsu Buffaloes history was hit by Shigeyoshi Morishita on March 13, 1950 at Fujidera Stadium in Osaka off of Nankai Hawks pitcher Hiroshi Nakahara. It was the second game in club history. The then Kintetsu Pearls would beat the Hawks 4-3 for the first win in franchise history. Shigeyoshi Morishita is one of those guys for whom not much information is out there, despite doing some pretty great things in his short career. Morishita had originally hailed from Nishinomiya and had escaped the draft by enrolling at Hosei University, despite some dubious reports that the Tigers had offered him a deal out of high school in 1939. Morishita would instead debut for the Pacific Baseball Club in 1946, where he became a renowned power hitter and very occasional relief pitcher. After a down year in 1949, the expansion Kintetsu Pearls had snapped him up and he immediately returned to form, hitting a career-high 30 home runs, good for second in the PL. In 1951, he even hit 3 homers in 3 straight at-bats. But from there, he slowly declined until he retired after the 1955 season. We know next to nothing of his life after baseball, only that he passed away in 2000 at the age of 80. He finished with 99 career home runs. The Nishi-Nippon Pirates were a product of hubris. Despite Nishi-Tetsu reaching out to try and get a joint venture going to bring pro baseball back to Fukuoka, Nishi-Nippon Shimbun went at it alone, lost a boatload of money, and came back to Nishi-Tetsu with their tails between their legs. Nishi-Tetsu would buy the Pirates and merge them into the Clippers, creating the Nishi-Tetsu Lions, who we now know as the Saitama Seibu Lions. The first home run in the 1-year history of the Nishi-Nippon Pirates was hit by Takeshi Hibino on March 14, 1950 at Kumamoto Municipal Stadium off of Giants Hall of Famer Hiroshi Nakao. It was the 3rd game in club history. The game itself was a slugfest with 7 home runs in total, 4 by the Giants, 3 by the Pirates. Unfortunately, all 3 Pirates homers were solo shots, and the Giants won 10-3. Takeshi Hibino was a veteran presence on what was as a whole a pretty young Pirates squad. He had joined the Hankyu Baseball Club as a 19-year-old in 1939 after being a standout at Toho High School. Known for his stocky build, which made him appear quite slow, Hibino was actually sneakily fast and very aggressive on the base paths. He also gained a reputation as one of the best framers in the JPBL, although we have no data to back that up. He got drafted in 1943 but survived the war and returned to the now Hankyu Braves, whom he played for until he got poached by the Pirates in 1950. Seeing him as the answer to what looked to be a fairly weak pitching staff. That, didn't work. Although he did have success in a battery with Toshiaki Ogata. Ogata, being a former Giant, was targeted for reacquirement by the Giants in 1951, and they wanted to bring in Hibino alongside him. But the league would determine that their rights were property of the Nishi-Tetsu Lions, so they stayed. Hibino would play for the Lions until 1959, famously hitting 3 home runs in the losing effort in the 1954 Japan Series, leading to some people believing he was robbed of the Fighting Spirit Award. As his abilities faded, he found a new calling as Kazuhisa Inao's personal catcher, and the two would team up to win 3 straight Japan Series together. Hibino's style of catching would later be adopted by Katsuya Nomura, the greatest catcher in NPB history. Although he only hit 56 home runs in his career, Hibino would lead Hankyu in home runs 3 times during his decade with the club. He passed away in 1975 at the age of 55. The Takahashi Unions were founded in 1954 in order to bring the Pacific League up to an even 8 teams. In their 3 years of existence, the team struggled to draw fans, couldn't make money, and couldn't compete. They would be bought by Daiei in 1957 and merged into the Daiei Stars, who in turn merged into the Mainichi Orions, who we now know as the Chiba Lotte Marines. The first home run in the short history of the Takahashi Unions was hit by Toshiaki Yamada on March 28, 1954 at Hankyu Stadium against Hankyu Braves pitcher Heishichi Sato. It was the second game in club history. It would be the only run the Unions could muster as they fell to the Braves 3-1. A graduate of Rikyo University, Toshiaki Yamada was initially signed by the Mainichi Orions, but found himself constantly overshadowed and only playing 6 games for the club, leading to him jumping ship for the Unions when they were founded. A contact-hitting phenom, he became one of the few above replacement level players that the Unions could field in their entire history. He would be an all-star in 1955. When the Unions merged into the Orions, Yamada again jumped ship, this time to the Tokyo Flyers, but once again he was unable to get any playing time, and he retired after playing only 2 games in the 1958 season. Yamada then drops off the face of the earth. All we know is that he died of leukemia in 2001 at the age of 68. Yamada only hit 8 home runs in his career, but he did manage to hit 16 triples. Even though no one really remembers the team he played for, he still made his mark as he was one of only 2 Unions to ever be named an All-Star.